Welcome to Cyclone InCYders. I'm your host, Ben Olson, joined as always with Bravard and John Miller. We're going to jump right into it. We had an exciting basketball game at Hilton Coliseum tonight. The Iowa State men's basketball team got that bounce-back win against TCU, defeating them 65-59 after what looked like a shaky second half. Jared, why don't you jump right in? What'd you think of this team bouncing back after a disappointing 30-point loss? The worst loss in Hilton Coliseum history on Saturday.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important that they get back on the win column, especially at home against a favorable matchup like TCU. And you see they had that 16-point lead at half. They haven't shown to be a great second half team as they time and time again have either given up a lead or let the other team extend their lead, which they did again tonight. But they were able to hold it together there at the end. Caleb Grill with a key block and with a key stop there at the end of the game to pull through. But it was really important for them to get back in Hilton and get that win after that loss, like you mentioned the other day.
Yeah, I agree. It was nice to see some fight still left in this Iowa State team. Solomon Young posted a good night, 20 points. And Trey Jackson finally got hot for Iowa State, dropping 18 points with them. Like you mentioned, Caleb Grill had some solid minutes. John, what'd you think of the overall play tonight?
Yeah, kind of touched on it a little bit. It's nice to see them freshmen step up at the end of the game because, they've kind of been a few of the weak points in the Iowa State roster. But it's really nice to see Solomon kind of coming into being that leader that we haven't had without Tyrese, and especially that bounce-back win. It's just things, you can build on going into next season, especially Bolton. I mean, he had the ball, ISOing, getting points. I mean, those are all things you like to see. I mean, they kind of talked about Condit talked about the accountability and defensively, so it sounded like they had that for the most part in this game, and let them come back a little bit, but for the most part, just a better performance on the defensive end and build on those things going into next year.
Yeah, you mentioned Solomon there.
Yeah.
With the keys that he was, and they went to him when it was tied late there within the last minute to get one of the crucial buckets to keep that lead there at the end. It's good to see him kind of blossoming here by the end of the year.
Yeah, and people forget Solomon still has another year of eligibility left, so it'll be nice if he can continue this play into next season. I mentioned it right before we talked about this. The worst loss in Hilton Coliseum was this Saturday against Texas Tech, 30 points. Do you guys read too much into that? Or, we obviously lost by 29 to Kansas earlier in the year. It was nice to see him bounce back. Do you think that affects these guys at all this late in the season?
I would say that it does. I mean, like I kind of talked about with the accountability thing. Like with Tyrese gone, they need a leader to step up to be a more cohesive unit, and just those things that need to be accomplished as a team inside instead of necessarily on the court. Just things like that. I mean, build on.
I mean, George Condit had a really great quote earlier this week talking about he thought that loss kind of rallied the guys to finish playing for the seniors, and they felt for them. So it was nice to see him come out tonight and, grind out a win. That was something that they haven't always been able to do this year. You look at that TCU game when they were on the road. They let that one slip, so it was nice to see him finish the game out tonight. But sort of a weird week for Iowa State basketball. Of course, the Des Moines Register reporting that Steve Prohm talking about in his presser, a stranger approached him outside of the Sukup basketball complex, talking about encouraging him to just continue to build good men. Did you guys read into that at all? What do you think that says kind of about the Iowa State fan base? And, do you think, are there going to be any changes made for next season with this Iowa State basketball program? Or do you think the fan base is behind Prohm still at this point?
To me, it appears that they're still behind him. And that was just a nice kind of thing to see. Through all the struggles, Iowa State fans still have his back, and you can still offer a word of encouragement instead of saying your negative thoughts. You never know what someone's going through. It's hard on all of them, especially Prohm. They all want to win, and it hasn't been clicking for them. And so I thought it was kind of nice to see someone, give a little encouraging word to them at this point in the season.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, that's one of those things. Just Ames, Iowa for you. I mean, the men's basketball team has made the tournament, like 9 out of the last 10 years or 8 out of the last 10, something like that. So, I mean, we're always going to have that support, I feel like. Even, I mean, you think of like the Paul Rhodes football era. I mean, even though we necessarily didn't have the best records, we still had that support and, it kind of blossomed when Campbell came. So I think that support is always going to be there. It's just whether or not, we are performing well on the court, and even if we're not, we still have those people behind us, and they're always going to ride with Iowa State. So,
I agree. I think it's really clear that Coach Prohm is a good guy. He's good for this program. He represents it well. He does things the Iowa State way, and it's unfortunate that they're struggling this season. But I think we all know that nobody's hurting from it more than those guys are. In the locker room.
I mean, another thing I would like to say is, Prohm, you talked about building great young men. I mean, we've had the most players go to the draft since he's been here than we ever have. I mean, between Hoiberg and him. So it's like, we've shown the ability to be a solid program, not only for the college level, but for the NBA as well. So, I mean, you can't really not knock on him for that stuff.
I agree. I don't think any changes need to be made to this Iowa State basketball program. I think it's just going to take some patience. But the season's not over. 2 games left to play. Quick last note. Do you guys think an NIT run is in the possibility realm for this Iowa State basketball team?
If they make it, it's possible. That's still kind of up in the air right now. I guess I haven't looked too much into it. They're kind of maybe on that bubble, maybe not. It's kind of like two seasons ago when they were just outside of the NIT. They are just a little better this year in terms of wins and record, and so I think if they do make it, you could see a little run there. They're starting to maybe figure it out here at the end of the year with getting Solomon going, like we mentioned earlier. So it's certainly in the cards. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I personally think that they probably won't make it, but it's going to take a couple wins in the Big 12 tournament and 2 wins down the stretch here. But just like I've kind of touched on, just keep building on things that they will learn from tonight, and just head into the next season well.
I agree. I think if you look at some of the bad losses that this team has had, it's going to hurt them when you're talking about postseason play, and they would need to have a good Big 12 tournament run. But that's up to those guys. They're going to keep playing hard, and we'll just find out. And talking about grinding out wins, unfortunately for the women's basketball team on Saturday, things did not go their way. They lost to Texas Tech 77-74 on a controversial last-second 3-point foul call. Texas Tech ended up sinking 3 free throws with 1.2 seconds left to take that win, which is one that really hurts this late in the season, especially when this is an Iowa State women's team that's kind of on the bubble right now with the NCAA tournament talk. So I just want to get your guys' thoughts on sort of the foul call. And then, you saw that they're fighting hard. I want to talk about some of the individual performances that we're going to expect the rest of this season.
Yeah, I mean, as for the foul call, I didn't like it personally. I think, down the stretch, especially on those 50-50 calls, I mean, you got to let the players decide the game, right? I think that's everybody's perspective, whether that's coaches, players, fans, anybody. But just something for fans to think about. You might think of that call at the end of the game there as like the big takeaway from the game, but I mean, Iowa State, in my opinion, didn't deserve to win that game. They turned the ball over 20 times. Brewer for Texas Tech, their big post presence, absolutely dominated. I mean, she had 20 points, 7 blocks. You just can't have those things happen if you're going to win a big game like that. So, I mean, those are just things to think about, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. 1.2 seconds is awfully late in the game to be calling a foul like that. You hate to see games that are decided on calls like this. But like the points you made, I mean, Iowa State kind of had to make a comeback there at the end. They were down 10 in the fourth quarter. So I don't know if they deserve to win the game. It's a tough way to end it. But I think the girls know, and Coach Fennelly certainly knows, that they're going to need to play better for 4 quarters if they want to see, results and grind out close games here at the end of the season when they really count. So we kind of talked about this last show. Just like in that TCU road game and in this Texas Tech game, they're really hot from 3-point range. They're turning the ball over too much, and they're kind of getting dominated down in points in the paint. What do they need to change, you guys? Why are they getting too outside-minded, or what do you think's up with the women's basketball team right now?
Kind of like we mentioned last week, and like what John was just mentioning here, just got to limit those turnovers. I mean, with the way they're shooting right now and the way they're scoring, the turnovers is really just what's killing them or being that Achilles heel, keeping them from winning some of these games. You just got to take care of the ball a little better. And then, like Brewer, you were saying, John, having that post presence, got to be guarding the post a little bit better. I mean, obviously she's a talented player, but it's really the main thing for me is limiting those turnovers.
Yeah, something you guys kind of talk about being outside-minded for the team. I think that just comes with Ashley Jones being, so much of a focus for other teams. She was up to 23 or 24 points a game, and now she's down to like 20. And that's not knocking on her. That's just Big 12 defense is focusing on her more. So I think, that just opens up more looks for other players and maybe, a reason for that tick in three-point percentage. But, yeah, just kind of like you talked about, this turnovers killing them. As for post play and, giving up all those points down low, Big 12, one of the best conferences in women's basketball, men's basketball too. It's just you're going to get players like Brewer and Aoki Lee from TCU and Cox from Baylor. I mean, there's great post presences all around. Mack from Oklahoma State. I mean, it's just a matter of handling them every night and doing the best you can. I mean, I don't think you can look more into it than that.
Yeah, I agree. Especially the point you made about teams clamping down on Ashley Jones. Yeah. I think that has made a difference in their offense this late in the year. I think some players are going to have to step up, and it's kind of a youth thing, too. Mm-hmm. Espen Miller-McGraw did have a good game against Texas Tech, but this team's young, and I think that's kind of a result of all these turnovers. So it'll be interesting to see if in clutch time, the big games at the end of the year, if this team can kind of gain their composure, and we can see them make strides in that. So they do have 4 games left on the season. Winning out's going to be hard with a tough game with Baylor coming to Hilton Coliseum. Going to need some Hilton magic to win that one. But how do you guys think this team needs to finish to make the NCAA tournament? They're currently projected to be a 10 seed, paired up with Duke, and they'll be playing in Stanford. Do you think that's a reasonable place for them to finish, or what are your expectations, John?
Yeah, it's going to probably come down to these next 2 games, in my opinion. Everything from the 3 seed in the Big 12 to the 9 seed is open. I mean, right now, Texas is 1 game above Iowa State, and Iowa State's tied with Kansas State for 4th. And then 5th through 9th, all the teams are 5 and 7, which is just 2 games less than Iowa State. So they have big ones here coming between TCU and West Virginia. Beat TCU last time, or not TCU, sorry, Kansas State. And then West Virginia on the weekend there. So they need to win one of the 2, in my opinion, to kind of maintain that tournament spot. Because next week they have most likely a win against Kansas, who's in 10th, and then Baylor, who's number 1 in the country. So, I mean, in my opinion, those games are kind of decided. But these 2 games that are coming up aren't. So they're going to be kind of, games that will have definitely a big impact on their seeding.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely, Jared.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, John, there. A loss to Baylor in the last game wouldn't necessarily hurt them. Yeah. You'd like to see them compete in that game and at least show something to the committee there, but they really got to have 2, if not the other 3 games that they have here. Mm-hmm. That West Virginia game that they dropped in Morgantown, they had that big comeback, didn't quite come all the way back, so you'd like to see them make that statement and beat West Virginia, along with the Kansas and the K-State, which they beat earlier. So I don't think a loss to Baylor hurts. They're obviously one of the top teams. And then just a game or 2 good performance when it comes down to the Big 12 tournament, just to solidify their spot.
I agree. I think based on their current projection that their destiny is in their own hands. They've got 3 winnable games left. If they can play to the level that Coach Fennelly is asking them to play to, then I think they'll get the results they want. Otherwise, they're just going to be pressure mounting for their games in Kansas City in the Big 12 tournament. They're going to have to prove themselves there. So they have the opportunity definitely to even improve on that 10 seed, I think.
Yeah, something I would just like to add to what you guys were saying. When it comes to the tournament, everybody wants to see the best players in the country, and I think Ashley Jones really helps Iowa State's case there. Mm-hmm. Even if they were to underperform in these last games of the season, I think just having her on the team helps a lot as for our tournament case compared to other teams. I mean, when you have a 20-point-per-game score, everybody wants to see that, fans, committee, so.
Yeah, and taking the tradition with this Iowa State women's program as well. That's all we all have for this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk an exciting finish in Iowa State wrestling and some big news for Iowa State softball, including a big win this last weekend. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Cyclone InCYders. Welcome back to Cyclone InCYders. The Iowa State wrestling team finished off their regular season schedule this last weekend, and they finished, guys, 7-1 in Big 12 play, which ties for their best conference record in school history. So congrats to the Iowa State wrestling team, of course, after that big comeback win against UNI. Kept things rolling. They fell to number 24, Missouri, on the road. Of course, they didn't have their full lineup, and they weren't fully healthy there for that meet. But then they did bounce back with a nice victory over North Dakota State, 22-16 on Sunday. So now we're looking at, guys, 2 weeks until the Big 12s. What do you expect? Let's talk from a team angle first. What do you expect out of this team? And then we can get into some individual guys that our listeners should pay attention to.
As a team, I would like to see them, give Oklahoma State a run for their money at the Big 12 Conference. They fell to them by a pretty big score back a month or two ago. But a couple of those matches, they won 2 matches in the duel, and then a couple that were close. So I'd like to see them compete. They tied record-wise in the Big 12 with Oklahoma State. So we saw Carr and Parker and Gremmel get the wins against Oklahoma State there, and Small was close. I know he got hurt on Sunday, so I don't know how ready he'll be. But I do think they have the ability to compete. Oklahoma State is dominant, but I'd like to see the Cyclones keep it close.
Yeah, you kind of touched on them being limited at the Missouri meet there. I would say, other than that one, they've just been building ever since, Dresser kind of talked about micromanaging them, and I think they responded really well to that, as a team. So I think all you can hope for is just them to keep building and head into Big 12 play, kind of peaking at the right time.
You're talking about building, John. How big does finishing 7-1 in Big 12 play into Coach Dresser's kind of culture change that he's trying to get going with this Iowa State wrestling team? Is that something that they'll be able to carry into the next couple of seasons and beyond?
Yeah, I would say yes, because, I just what I've heard from Dresser at press conferences and stuff, he seems like, a player's coach and somebody that everybody can kind of get under. So I think just the motivation and spirit that he brings to Iowa State, I feel like all of our approaches maybe represent our program and like what we want to see very well, but maybe that's just me being biased. But I feel like everybody that we have represents that Iowa State way that we kind of have. So, I think Dresser's here to stay.
I agree, and I hope that 7-1 finishes, 8-0 starts to be a staple for Iowa State wrestling like it used to be. We talked about some individual guys. We were talking before the show, going to Big 12s. Who do you expect to compete? Maybe get that weight championship? And then, just score for Iowa State, Jared.
Obviously I'm looking at Carr to win the 157 there. He's had that injury, but I think they're handling it well. He didn't wrestle this weekend. He wrestled at the Gilbert, Invitational there, just one match, and then won that pretty easily. Then they got the medical retire there, and so he didn't wrestle against Missouri or North Dakota State. But I think they have, his injury situation well under control. And, he'll be ready by the time Big 12s roll around to make a good run at it. And, looking at, Ian Parker or Gannon Gremmel for the other 2 shots there as they picked up wins, like I said earlier, in that Oklahoma State duel. So looking at those guys. And Colbray and Coleman, when they had the Oklahoma State duel, they were new to their weight classes. They had just switched not long before, and they're kind of coming into their own here, getting used to those weight classes. So maybe look to them to make a little run as they didn't lose by too much during that Oklahoma State duel.
Yeah, I like the point you made about Colbray and Coleman and how that Oklahoma State meet, of course, they were just trying out their new weights. I feel like Iowa State under Dresser has been able to always have one surprise guy. Last year I think they only had Chase Straw, I believe, but he wasn't fully expected to win, made a great performance at the Big 12, so I'm expecting at least one guy out of their lineup to, compete harder than expected.
Yeah, we talk about Carr. He's one of the best in the country, obviously. But other than him, we got a lot of guys ranked in that 10 to 15 range. So it's just going to be whether or not they can kind of, I guess you could say overperform, but just kind of go out there and compete and, maybe beat somebody they're not supposed to beat and sneak in. So.
Right, should be exciting in a couple weeks at the Big 12s for Iowa State wrestling. And as much as we'd like to see them pull an upset, we're talking about upsets. Iowa State softball had a big weekend for the program, defeating number 5 Michigan 5-1 as their highlight win at the South Carolina Gamecock Invitational. And they also played really hard against number 22 South Carolina, losing 3-5. But going back to that Michigan win, how big of a victory is that for Cyclone softball, you guys?
Yeah, I would say that I mean, something that I instantly thought about was last year, they just missed on the NCAA tournament, and their biggest kryptonite was losing games early in the season that they just couldn't afford to lose. So, a win against a top-ranked team at the time, at least, definitely helps build their resume if they're going to be in that same position going forward. But, yeah, they just definitely got to continue to kind of beat some teams they're not supposed to here in the early season and build that resume.
Yeah, I think it's a big confidence boost for this young team. Savannah Sanders and Emma Highland, the two senior pitchers, graduated last year. So they got, 2 freshmen and a sophomore pitching right now. Yeah. And I think this, just gives a big boost to their confidence, as they were able to pull off this win with some good pitching here early on in the season. Getting that signature win like you were talking about, John, this will certainly look good on the resume down the road this season.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a great win for Coach Jamie, too. I think it's really going to hopefully start to change the culture at this team like we've been talking about. And it's kind of a confidence builder that they can carry with themselves the rest of the season. So they're halfway through their spring tournaments right now, sitting at 8-6 record, which I think we've sort of become accustomed to Iowa State softball ending, their spring tournament run with a losing record when they go into conference play. I think if they can stay around that 500 range, that's just going to be a really big momentum builder for them because they do play tough competition and it's a lot of road travel for this team. And another notable thing to talk about over the weekend was Sammy Williams setting the new career school record for career home runs with 43. So obviously, I mean, she leads so many statistical categories for this Iowa State softball team. Where do you guys think Sammy Williams is going to go down in Iowa State softball? Is she the greatest to ever do it? Hear names.
I would say yes, but you kind of talked about that culture change with Jamie. She's been a huge part of it. I mean, I think she's probably attracted more people here than we could ever imagine for talent-wise. But, I mean, she doesn't just have the power. She has contact. She's a great fielder. Pinkerton always talks about how she's, do it all. Sammy just does Sammy. And it's just, that's something it's great to see in one of those signature players in any of the Iowa State programs.
And I think we're seeing that payoff of her not participating in the exhibition season, getting back to fully healthy. She's an All-American for a reason, and they knew that, and they knew they needed her now instead of trying to risk something back in the fall. And so I think she will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, softball player to come through here. But just great for Pinkerton and the staff here to get some recognition on the big stage early in these tournaments.
I agree. I think Sammy Williams is certainly looking to leave Iowa State on a high note, and she's going to be a driving force for this Iowa State team all season. Of course, I like the point you made, John, about, she does it at the plate, obviously, with her big bat, but she also does it, at the shortstop position and on the bases. Just an all-around fantastic softball player, so she will be fun to watch for the rest of this season. And hopefully they can carry some momentum from this huge upset of Michigan. And I'd like to not be their only upset of the year. Of course, the Big 12 has some tough competition. One other thing I wanted to touch on is the Iowa State gymnastics team is sticking at number 17 in the top 25, and they return home after a long road stretch. They have a meet against Michigan State on Friday, so be sure to come out to Hilton Coliseum and cheer on the Cyclones. Anything else you guys wanted to add?
Yeah, just a lot of big stuff coming up here, especially for women's basketball. So just make sure you guys stay tuned to all the Iowa State athletics. I mean, usually they always say March is the funnest time of the year for anything. So
that's right. We're heading into the exciting part of winter sports. That's all we have on this edition of Cyclone InCYders. We'll be back next week with more analysis and updates. Go Cyclones.